We are a country, and even beyond that, a civilization that is built on the deep truth that there is a God, and not just any God, but a God who sacrificed himself for us, who went to a cross for us. That's the foundational core truth of all of Western civilization. And as we have allowed that to be stripped out of our culture, I think this is one of the reasons you see more and more disunity. It's why you see a lack of purpose. It's why you see Americans. What is it that binds us together? It's those core foundational beliefs. What is it that makes Western civilization unique? I mean, you think about it. Well, we believe in the dignity of the common man. Well, where does that come from? That comes from Christianity. We believe in individual rights. Where does that come from? That comes from Christianity. It's so foundational. As you take that out, I think you see this cultural drift. You see purposelessness on a mass scale, just like we're seeing in individual lives. And one of the reasons this is an exciting cultural moment is you see more and more Americans saying, wait a minute, as we're talking about, there's more to life than this. And you see a new openness in our culture to these foundational truths.
I think it's interesting because I was reading a book, I guess it was George Weigel wrote a book, it must be 15 years ago, called The Cube and the Cathedral. And he's talking about Europe and how the cathedral was once, the thing when you think of Europe and Christendom. And then he talks about this secular, just this bleak building in France, this cube it's bigger than Chartres Cathedral. And he talks about these two views. One is this view of, a world where God is at the center and we all aspire to know God, and the whole civilization is built on that. And then you have this other bleak secular idea. And one of the principal metrics is that in a faith-based culture, people have a lot of kids. In a secular culture, they don't. And it strikes me as interesting that, when we think of the EU at this point, you get the idea of a lot of childless bureaucrats, which is fundamentally antithetical to the American model, right? You think of Cincinnatus and his plow, this idea that we're supposed to have a life and a job and whatever, and we go to serve our government for a little season, but we're not meant to be professional politicians. We're meant to have other lives. And it's interesting because that to me comes up over and over. There are these two dramatically opposed visions. And when I think of the EU and the plight of Europe right now, it really is, it's kind of shocking. I mean, they are, in terms just of population, they're going down the tubes, obviously. And we know that, the Muslim millions are replacing them because they at least have this idea that we should have big families. So it's just fascinating how one's worldview leads to a certain kind of civilization.
Absolutely. And again, having families, having children, that is a vote for the future. To have a child is to say, I believe that the future is something worth investing in. I believe that there is a future. And as a father, you think about fatherhood is really about giving your life away. It is to be a father is to say, I'm no longer the frontier generation. My children are literally going to replace me, and I'm going to live toward the future. I'm going to live away from myself. I'm going to live toward the future. And the fact that fewer and fewer men in our society have wanted to be fathers is not a good thing. And this is why it's so important to say, no, listen, this is how you make an impact as a man. But I'll give you, speaking of different models, Theodore Roosevelt, who's a great hero of mine, warned a century ago now, more than a century ago, that as Americans, we have a fundamental choice. Are we going to just stand for, in his words, wealth and the creation of wealth? He said, if we are a society that only stands for wealth and the creation of wealth, and I'm quoting him here now as best as I can from memory, then he said, we will stand for little indeed when looked at through the vistas of the ages. But he went on to say, we have always stood for more than that. We have always stood for what is true, what is good, what is beautiful. We have always stood for the eternal things. Our society needs to hear that message again.
I think, hold your applause. I think that they wanted to, but they held it. In the book, you talk about a man's duties as a warrior, builder, priest, king. I want to talk for a moment about the warrior thing, because it seems to me that is for sure one of the things that has been lost, this idea, and particularly in the church. When I think of the models of Christianity that have been put out there by a lot of pastors or Christian leaders, it really is as though being a warrior is a dirty word. They would love to, get rid of Elijah and David, and those examples are like, nah. We just want gentle Jesus, meek and mild, which, by the way, that's not even Jesus, right? So, but the idea that men are called to be warriors flies in the face of this model that a lot of particularly Christians have adopted, but this idea of perpetual winsomeness, that I'm always supposed to be winsome and smiling. It's like the Ned Flanders version of Christianity, and it's not actual Christianity. So I was excited that in the book you talk about that aspect of it, that we're meant to be warriors. We both know, most of us know, that has been so denigrated. I mean, going all the way back to Vietnam with the rise of feminism, this idea of man as a warrior, that's the ultimate image of toxic masculinity. So talk a little bit about why God calls us to be warriors as men.
The short answer is because there's evil in the world, and men are part of God's solution to confront it. And you see this as early as the Garden of Eden. We look at the garden and we know the story of Genesis 3 where the serpent comes to Eve, but we don't often pause to ask ourselves, how is it that the serpent gets into the garden in the middle of the garden? The tree of life was in the middle of the garden. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil was in the middle of the garden. So how is it that the serpent, this evil thing, gets in there? And at least part of the answer is Adam had not done his job. God told Adam to guard and keep the garden. He did not do so. He did not guard the perimeter. He exposed his wife.
He could have built a big, beautiful wall with gates. With gates, of course. That's with gates, right? But that's interesting. I've not thought of that. We'll keep going because that's.
So you have this from early on. We see that part of what it means to be a faithful man and to fulfill the duties, the call that God has in our life is we're supposed to put ourselves in the way of evil. What's a man good for? Part of what he's good for is to go stand between what matters in life, his wife, his children, and what's evil. He's supposed to insert himself between those things. Now, you mentioned the church. We see this later on. I don't put this in the book, but this is as true scripturally. We see this later on in Leviticus, where God appoints the Levites to be the priests in perpetuity for Israel. And what does he tell them to do? He says, guard the temple, guard the sanctuary, guard it, and if someone tries to get in, you are to go and to stop them. There's the sense that the sacred, that which is important to God, has got to be guarded by men on pain of our lives. And again, there's something, I think, true for every man deep down, really, that we thrill to this. We want our lives to matter, and we want to go stand on a line. We want to matter in that way. And men need to hear the truth that, listen, if evil is going to be confronted in the world, we have to do it. Don't look to the right, look to the left. You go do it. And start right in your family. You go and protect your family.
That's part of the issue, too, is that if you don't believe in God, then you can't really believe in something called evil. And we've seen this in secular Western Europe, where they kind of act like everything can be, you're not really a criminal who's done a bad thing. We can give you therapy. We don't have to do anything dramatic. So that idea of evil, people with a particularly secular view, they bristle at the concept of evil. They want to explain it away, even. I didn't want to talk about current events, but recently the deportation of like bloodthirsty gang members, violent people, and there's some people they don't that category makes them uncomfortable. It's almost like they're putting forth the idea, which goes all the way back to the 60s, that they're just misunderstood, or that just comes out of poverty, or they're somehow unwilling to say no, that's evil. And we need to fight evil. It's almost too black and white.
Yes, the reason is because if there's real evil and if we have some responsibility, then our decisions matter and we're accountable for something. And that's not what many on the left want. What they want to do is they move the concept of evil away from persons towards systems. So now it's this system is oppressive.
Right.
These structures are oppressive.
Right.
What does that do? Well, it gets me off the hook. Because it means, oh, well, it's not my fault. I was raised in a capitalist society. Therefore, I was raised in an inherently systemically oppressive society. Therefore, it's not me. It's other people. It's it out there. Whereas, if Solzhenitsyn is right, if the line that divides good and evil runs through every human heart, oh, well, by golly, I have some responsibilities.
You know, Solzhenitsyn got that from me.
I got it in one of your books.
But I'm like Reagan. Like I figure I don't care who gets credit. As long as my ideas get out there, I don't care. No, but it's such a fundamental concept that morality, right? And again, it's gone out of the culture, it's gone out of secular culture, and we're dealing with cultural Marxism, which just wants to get rid of all the basic categories, male and female. I mean, we've been living through some bizarre times, but I think it's gone so far that there is a backlash, and so I'm hopeful. I want to ask about the other categories. You mentioned priest and king. Talk a little bit about those. We'll start with priest, I guess.
I think every man is called to represent the authority of God, the good purposes of God, to represent those and to be a channel for those, for his family and his loved ones. In other words, and you see this again in the garden. In Genesis, it's so foundational. It's all there. It's all there in the first 2 chapters. What does God call Adam to do? He calls Adam to reflect his love and authority into the world. It's supposed to flow from God through Adam out to the world. And as that happens, the world is made into what God intends it to be. That's to be a priest. To be a priest also flows the other way, where we take the cares and the concerns of those who are in our charge and we bring those before the Lord. And this is, being a father is what really brought this home to me. I've never prayed like I have before when I had children. And I tell the story in the book about my oldest son, my oldest child, Elijah, who was diagnosed with a rare condition when he was a very little.
That's an amazing story. Tell that. That is an amazing story.
I had this. I had this tradition that I'm sure RFK, who you mentioned earlier, RFK Jr. would really approve of. I take my children for donuts every Saturday. So don't tell Bobby Kennedy. So I had my 2 boys, and we were at the donut shop, and I noticed that my older boy was limping, and I thought, he's a very active kid. I thought maybe he fell out of a tree or something. So I asked him. I said, "Bud, is your leg hurting you?" And he said, "No." And I said, "But you're kind of dragging it." And he said, "Well, I can't put any weight on it." He was a really little guy. So I thought, okay. So I go home and mention it to my wife. She, being a lot smarter than I am, she immediately calls the doctor. She's like, I don't like the sound of that. And the doctor said, we need to see him right away. Long story short, he was diagnosed with what we thought at first was going to be a degenerative condition that would affect all of his joints. And, my wife and I are thinking, what can we do? And so he goes through these batteries of tests, and they're thinking, they're telling me at one point, the doctor's like, well, listen, he may have to be in a wheelchair when he gets older. And I'm thinking, you're kidding me. What did this drive me to do? I have never prayed, Eric, like I have in my life. I literally getting down physically onto my knees. All I know to do was, I'm not a doctor. I don't know what to do. These are smart people who are telling me this is maybe the best we can hope for your kid. And all I know to do is just cry out to the Lord. That's when I learned something about what it is to be a father, but also to be a priest, to take the cares and burdens of my children that I cannot do anything for myself. I couldn't make it right for him, but I could take that to the Lord. And it's a story of healing. We had a lot of people who prayed for Elijah. He then went back and got another diagnosis, and they said, actually, that's not it. It's not the joint condition. We think it's a condition just located to his hip. And I am pleased to report here today, he's 12 years old. He is a soccer player extraordinaire. That hip is completely healed. He has no limb. It's amazing. That's just the Lord.
It's interesting as you talk about when you're a parent, it's almost like the Lord tricks us in a good way, right? I mean, he tricks us by, we fall in love with this beautiful woman, right? And, not thinking about the work that lies ahead in the marriage, right? It's not just us. It's every marriage. But it's kind of funny. It's the same thing with kids. It's like it's so wonderful to have kids. And then you realize, wow, I love this kid so much. I would happily die for this kid. It's a new kind of reality. And so it's like the Lord kind of, I say tricks us, brings us into this idea of self-sacrifice where we joyfully would die for our spouse or our kids. It's something that you can't really experience very much if you don't have kids or you don't whatever. And it humbles you. I mean, like you said, you're never going to pray harder than you pray for your kids. You're just not going to. So it's humbling and it's beautiful. And so part of what you talk about in the book really is that God calls us to this adventure. It's an adventure. It's a glorious adventure, and it's hard. And so many young men are hungry for that. Before we close, I want to talk a little bit about, you talk about king. I mean, this is another great concept. So go ahead.
Well, and speaking of a concept that our popular culture, and particularly the left wing of it, really detests, the idea that any kind of masculine authority would be good. I mean, that's been the brunt of the attack. Any kind of masculine authority is attacked and is denigrated. But in truth, God gives us power to exercise on behalf of others. Men are meant to use the authority from their physical strength to the other positions of authority, like being a father that God gives them, in order to shelter, to protect, to empower, and upbuild. And, talking about children again, there's nothing that I found in my life that is more incredibly satisfying than getting to watch my children grow and flourish into the men and women that God has made them to be. And part of my job is to cover over them, protect them, to rule them in the terms of helping them acquire discipline, self-discipline, helping them understand this is true, this is not, this is good, this is bad. That's a form of exercising authority. But by doing that, I help them become who God has meant them to be. And it's incredibly, incredibly rewarding. And that's what God gives us authority to do.
I want to touch finally on just the concept of courage, because this is something that I've thought about just in the last few years, how courage is not extra credit. Like if you don't have courage, you can't hope to be who God made you to be. That's at the heart of everything. But you talk about that in the book.
Yes, and to go back to what you said a second ago about being an adventure, following God is an incredible adventure. Following the path of manhood is an incredible adventure, and it's an adventure precisely because it's hard. And that's where courage comes in. And I think that I hear a lot of times young men, I've got a lot of young men who work with me and work for me, and sometimes they'll say things like, men who aren't married yet, don't have kids yet, they'll say, oh, I'm just so busy. And I think, oh, you're not busy. And they'll say, oh, I'm just so tired. And I'll think, just wait. Just wait. But the courage, C.S. Lewis put this so beautifully in a book he wrote on the virtues. He said that courage is really the testing ground of all the other virtues. If you don't have courage, you can't have love. If you don't have courage, you can't have faithfulness. If you don't have courage, you really can't have anything else. That's where we prove it. Do you mean it or not? And this is why I come back to the point I'm making about sacrifice. Sacrifice is how you know it's real. And for men, I want to say, you're serious about it when you're willing to sacrifice. When it's costing you something, it is worth something. And we need to say to men, ultimately, our lives are meant to be a sacrifice. We're meant to lay down our lives on behalf of our wives, on behalf of our children, on behalf of our country, if need be. And putting your life onto that altar as a sacrifice, there is nothing more noble than that, and nothing that mirrors the character of Christ Jesus than that. And that takes courage, it takes humility, it takes surrender. It reveals grace. And those are ultimately the greatest, most profound, most empowering concepts in all of our civilization.
If you think these conversations are valuable,
would you do us a favor and please like this video and subscribe to this channel? When you do that, you help us get these conversations out to a wider audience by telling YouTube that people are interested in this. Also, you can go to SocratesInTheCity.com, sign up for our newsletter, and you can check back every week. There's new stuff here every week. Thank you for tuning in.